The United States spent 4 years and 400,000 lives defeating Nazi Germany, and then, secretly, hired over 1,600 of Hitler's top scientists, gave them new identities, erased their records, brought them to American soil, put them on the government payroll, and used their knowledge to build the United States space program and ballistic missile arsenal. This was not a rumor. It was not a theory. It was a classified government program, authorized at the highest levels, hidden for decades, and eventually confirmed through declassified documents that most Americans have still never seen. The program had a name, Operation Paperclip, and the man at the center of it, the scientist whose work made American space exploration possible, had spent the war years building missiles for Adolf Hitler using the forced labor of concentration camp prisoners. You were taught about the American victory in World War II. Nobody told you about the morning after. Operation Paperclip did not begin after Germany surrendered. It began while the war was still being fought. As Allied forces advanced through Germany in 1944 and early 1945, American military units were given a specific secondary mission alongside their combat operations: find the scientists. The concern driving this mission was real. German technological development had alarmed American intelligence throughout the war. The V-2 rocket, the world's first ballistic missile, had been hitting London since September 1944. German jet aircraft were ahead of anything the Allies had flying. German chemical and biological weapons research was decades beyond American capability. The man at the center of the rocket program was Wernher von Braun. Von Braun had designed the V-2 rocket at a facility called Peenemünde on the Baltic coast. The rockets were manufactured at an underground facility called Mittelwack, built and operated using prisoners from the Dora Mittelbau concentration camp. Historians estimate that more prisoners died building von Braun's rockets than were ever killed by those rockets in combat. Von Braun knew this. He had visited the facility. He had personally requested prisoner labor through SS channels. When American forces were closing in the spring of 1945, von Braun made a strategic decision. He chose to surrender, not to Soviet forces approaching from the east, but to American soldiers. He was not captured. He surrendered on his own terms, to the side he calculated would treat him best. He brought with him a team of over 100 rocket specialists and a buried cache of 14 tons of V-2 technical documents hidden in an abandoned mine shaft. Within weeks, he was in American custody, not as a prisoner, as a guest. July 16, 1969. Apollo 11 launches from Kennedy Space Center. An entire generation watches on television. Neil Armstrong walks on the moon, one of the genuinely great achievements of the 20th century. The man who designed the Saturn V rocket that carried Apollo 11 to the moon was Wernher von Braun. The same man, the same record, the same history. His NASA file contained no mention of his SS rank, no mention of his Nazi Party membership, no mention of the concentration camp prisoners whose labor had built his rockets. Those details had been removed deliberately, administratively, before he ever set foot on American soil. He stood in mission control that night and received a standing ovation. Both things are true. Hold that. Von Braun was the most publicly known of the paperclip scientists. He was not the most troubling case. Arthur Rudolph was the operations director of the Mittelwerk factory, the underground facility where V-2 rockets were built using concentration camp labor.
Historians estimate that 20,000 prisoners died there from exhaustion, malnutrition, and execution. Rudolph was brought to the United States under Operation Paperclip. He worked for NASA for decades. He was the project director for the Saturn V rocket program, the same rocket that carried Apollo 11. He received NASA's Distinguished Service Medal. In 1984, the Justice Department's Office of Special Investigations confronted Rudolph with documentation of his wartime activities. He renounced his American citizenship and returned to West Germany rather than face a legal proceeding. He was never charged with a crime in any jurisdiction. Walter Schreiber was a German medical physician who had overseen medical research programs during the war, research that used concentration camp prisoners as subjects without consent to test vaccines and treatments for epidemic diseases. After the war, Schreiber was employed by the U.S. Air Force School of Aviation Medicine in Texas. When a newspaper investigation exposed his presence in America in 1952, he was quietly transferred, not deported, not charged, but relocated to Argentina. These were not exceptional cases within Operation Paperclip. They were representative ones. President Truman had explicitly directed that anyone with an active Nazi record should be excluded from the program. The agency managing Paperclip, the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, responded to that directive in the most direct way available to it. It removed the records. If the record did not show a Nazi history, the policy was technically not violated. This is documented in the JIOA's own internal communications, declassified decades after the program ended. American government officials deliberately sanitized the files of men whose wartime activities they knew about in order to import those men into a country that just spent 4 years fighting the ideology they had served. They did it because the technology was considered more valuable than accountability.
Truman was told the recruits had been screened and found acceptable. What he was not told was that acceptable had been achieved by removing the parts of the record that would have made them unacceptable. The most powerful man in America was misled by the agency he controlled about the backgrounds of the people being brought into his country. This is the institutional logic we have documented throughout this series. The decision was made before the oversight could stop it. The evidence was managed before the accountability could reach it. And by the time anyone outside the program understood the full picture, the scientists were already here, already working, already producing results that made removing them politically impossible. Operation Paperclip ran officially from 1945 to 1959. In that period, it brought approximately 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technical specialists to the United States. The achievements are not in dispute. The Saturn V rocket, the American ballistic missile program, critical foundations of NASA's human spaceflight capability, the technological infrastructure that made the United States the dominant force in the Cold War space race, built in substantial part by men who had served the Third Reich. Journalist Annie Jacobsen spent years reconstructing the program from declassified documents for her 2014 book, Operation Paperclip. Her conclusion was measured and precise. The United States government made a deliberate choice: capability over accountability, technology over justice, the future over the past. And it made that choice as institutions examined throughout this series have consistently made their choices without informing the American public that the choice was being made. The research conducted using concentration camp prisoners, the data, the findings, the technical knowledge purchased at the cost of human lives was absorbed into American aerospace and weapons development without acknowledgement of its origins. The victims received nothing. No recognition, no compensation, no mention in the mission reports or the patent filings. Their suffering was reclassified, transferred from the context of wartime atrocity to the context of American achievement, with the paperclip files sitting in classified storage to ensure the connection was never publicly made.
A French survivor of the Dora Mittelbau concentration camp, named Jean Michel, wrote a memoir about his experience building V-2 rockets under conditions of deliberate brutality. He lived to see Neil Armstrong walk on the moon. He was asked what he felt watching the launch. He said the rocket that carried those men to the moon was built on a foundation of suffering the world had chosen to forget. He was not wrong. The paperclip on a folder is not a dramatic symbol. It is the most ordinary object possible. That is precisely the point. The most significant moral compromises in institutional history are rarely dramatic. They are administrative. A paperclip, a removed page, a file marked acceptable, and a decision made by people who believed they knew better not to look too closely at what the folder actually contained.
Operation Paperclip gave America the space program. It also gave America a template for how to acquire capability while erasing the moral cost, for how to classify the evidence of decisions the public would not have accepted, for how to point to the achievement and call it American, while the paperclip files sat in storage, ensuring nobody made the connection. We have now documented 13 programs and institutions in this series, each one operating on the same logic. The decision was too important to leave to the people it affected. In our next episode, we go somewhere that makes everything we have documented feel, somehow, even stranger. A forest in Northern California. Every summer, the most powerful men in America, presidents, executives, generals, media owners, gather for 2 weeks in complete secrecy and perform rituals around a 40-foot stone owl. This is not a metaphor. Nixon confirmed it on tape. That story, next episode.